I'd like to start this work session. It's our first work session on the 2018 municipal budget. Let's go around the table and identify ourselves for the record. We'll start with you, Felix.
Felix Rivera.
Red Dyson.
Tim Steele.
Eric Croft.
Dick Trainey.
John Weddleton.
Pete Peterson.
Forrest Dunbar.
Suzanne LaFrance.
Phil Falsey, municipal attorney.
Mike Abbott.
Lance Wilbur, OMB director. YouTube workforce.
Okay.
Community development.
Mike Chairman, Control Odd.
Well, thank you for being here. Mr. Mayor?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. We are here to introduce our budget to the Assembly. I want to begin by thanking everybody at the municipality who worked hard to put this budget together. I also want to thank members of the Assembly who were thoughtful and had some ideas that we were able to incorporate. Not that everyone on the Assembly is not thoughtful, but there's a couple of ideas that we singled out here. And the upshot of this budget is that property taxpayers are going to see significant relief, and we are going to maintain and increase our focus on public safety. Mr. Wilbur will explain all that in the course of his outline here, and I think I will let him go rather than steal his thunder, but suffice to say, this budget does a lot to maintain the municipality's strong credit rating, and it does a significant amount to stabilize our situation even in the face of the state's uncertainty.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Lance?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to add a little bit to, as the mayor mentioned, we started this process in June with the forecast of a $20 million deficit and how we were going to overcome that. And over the last 3 months, we've been working really hard with a combination.
Lance, let me interrupt you for a second. Let the record reflect we've been joined by Mr. Constant. Go ahead, Lance.
Through a combination of work from the departments proposing efficiencies and changes in their departments, we've also been working with our folks in our finance and treasury, what we could do to be more creative on and looking at better forecasting numbers for our revenues. And I'm going to explain all of those things inside the budget. I also want to give you a highlight of what we are looking at in our 2018 capital budget, and then a little quick snapshot of the utilities, and then talk about, as the mayor mentioned, as this budget is being proposed, how that might affect the property tax owners. Again, this is a high-level overview, so there's about 14 slides in here. We have scheduled work sessions for later in the month of October. We'll get into the details of the budget and individual departments. So, let me begin by the budget. It's focused on the priorities of the administration, I believe the Assembly, and definitely the community. We're focused on building this budget with public safety, economic development, and homelessness in mind. A couple of the key points I want to mention here is under public safety. We started this administration with rebuilding the police department. The budget continues that effort. We currently have 445 sworn officers. This budget will have an attrition academy, which I'll talk a little bit about. We maintain that force as we work to improve public safety. I think one of the big changes that you'll see in this budget is that we have 2 temporary paramedic units, that 81 and 82 that you may be aware of, particularly in public safety committee. We are looking to propose that we make those permanent as part of this budget inside our existing operating budget, inside the existing cap. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. Economic development, I think some of the changes that we're making in the departments and the efforts that they're helping economic development, and also as we try to reduce the tax burden on property owners, they can then turn those funds around inside the local economy. And then the homelessness. Really, in 2016, when we built the budget, we put about $400,000 in there, which we leveraged with other nonprofits and other organizations to help start addressing those homelessness issues and housing. We didn't have a lot of money in 2017. We're going to take advantage of revitalizing that in 2008.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair.
Mr.
Do you want to take questions as we go through, or let them
Lance, do
finish?
you want to take questions as you go or at the end?
We'd rather them at the end, Mr. Chairman.
I'll put you on the list, Fred. if you don't mind. You're first. Go ahead, Lance.
Thank you. This is a very simplistic slide of some of the most significant challenges as it relates to the budgetary matters that we face going from 2017 to 2018. When you look at where we were in March after the first quarter budget revisions, the changes in cost in this proposed budget, the healthcare for the municipality employees, this is a general government, is up a little more, almost $5.5 million. On labor, it's $3.6 million, and this includes the bargaining units that we have in place right now. It also recognizes the benefits of the recent labor agreement that we've come with IAFF to reduce our labor costs in 2018. We do have a cost in 2018, this $7.5 million. It's not quite half and half, but about 4.5 of that is we are going to start making payments on the loans that we've had to build SAP, so we have to start including that into our budget. And we also have about $3 million in there in support services, because we know that after we get into production of the system next week, and as we move forward the next 3 to potentially into 2018, we're going to need some support. So we have some additional resources in there for that. We had a similar number in 2017, but the application will be a little bit different in 2018, but still some outside support to make sure that we are successful in SAP. One of the things that we've had the opportunity to do in this budget is, as I mentioned, on public safety, the administration is proposing a police academy for 2018 to be an attrition academy. And then how the attrition actually occurs, the amount of personnel that may be attritioned out, that may affect the actual academy costs, and we'll take a look at that as we get into the first quarter. For fire, we are proposing to start an academy in September. That, at the same time, that will then bring 12 new paramedics, firefighters on board that will fund the 2 new ambulances that we have proposed in the equal bond, which I'll talk a little bit about here, for the capital side of the house. So there's an investment of almost $2 million in public safety beyond 2017. Snow plowing and homelessness. The administration recognizes that the situation of the state, the situation of the municipality, we had to make some tough choices last year to reduce our snow plowing efforts, but this year we're going to build that back up. We're also really looking at sidewalks, roads, and not only ours, the ones that will be in the states right away. We'll be working cooperatively with the state to identify how we assess those priorities. So this is some funds that we will identify to maintenance and operations for the purposes of snow removal. We'll talk a little bit about that in detail in a couple of weeks. For housing and homelessness, again, similarly, I mentioned it earlier, we want to identify some resources in this proposed budget so that we can continue to address our housing and homelessness concerns in the community. The reductions, while we were able to add a couple things, as I mentioned, we went out to the departments in June, and asked for departments to provide a 10% reduction for non-public safety, and then a 5% for public safety. I'm pleased to say that we did not have to take most of those reductions that were proposed, which is a good thing. However, there will be some effects to the departments. One of the key things in this one is in 2017 we had 9 or 10 positions that were solely dedicated to the building of SAP. We brought them on board, our municipal staff, to help support our contractual services. Now that the machine is built, we've taken those positions out, so those positions do not carry forward from 2017 to 2018. We do have about 20 departments that will be affected with a combination of labor, non-labor, contractual changes that will show a reduction in those departments of about $4 million. And so we will talk with that. We'll talk about that in more detail when we present a presentation on the 20th by department. For the Anchorage Police and Fire Retirement System contribution, currently the municipality, we contribute $10 million a year into their retirement system. We're looking at a different mechanism in which we can financially support that and still meet our obligations, and we will do that. But the effect of that change means that we won't have to put $10 million in 2018. We will continue that in 2019. So that's an important factor, and that's an important piece to closing our $20 million gap. So that's an important element of our proposal. The revenue changes. At a macro level, what we've done is when we approved the 2017 budget last November, we made adjustments in March in 1Q. These numbers reflect the changes that we expect to see on the revenue side from what we had approved in 1Q to 18. That's how we build a continuation budget. We look at where we were in March and a continuation. So this reflects the changes since March. Revenue sharing, when we built the 17 budget, we had $4 million in revenue sharing. When the state approved the capital budget, they increased that change from March until this budget by $3.2 million. So we show that as an additional add in 2018. Dividends, while the Port of Anchorage and Solid Waste Service continue to give us dividends, the Solid Waste Service will up their dividend contribution in 2018 by $300,000. And talking to the director, after first quarter, we may be able to see a little bit more than that, but we won't know until after the first quarter. Under marijuana, the projections from Treasury, and I think Dan Moore mentioned this to the Assembly's Public Finance Committee. Right now, we have $3 million in there, the treasurer, and based on the trend of production and sale of the marijuana industry, we're going to show a $3.5 million or up $3 million increase in our revenues. And then the administration is proposing an adjustment to the ambulance fee. We will introduce an ordinance in October that will increase the ambulance fee by $100. And based on the call volume and how those projections there would be, we would raise an additional $400,000 as a result of that. Thank you, Mayor. As the Mayor mentioned, when we look at how this compares with other jurisdictions around the state, this is very comparable to the increase that we're proposing to bring us to the limit that's comparable to the increase.
Those revenue changes are all additions. I know we want to wait for questions, all additions, okay.
Additions to what was anticipated in 2017.
It's very short.
So let me talk a little bit about our proposed capital budget. A lot of work, hard work went into working this and simplifying the sheet. Again, typically these departments in general government work session, we'll talk a little bit about this. Let me sort of highlight some of the projects that we're proposing when you receive your budget books on Monday. So the total amount of the proposed bond is $45.92 million. It's a very similar number, a little bit less than we had last year in our proposal, and that was also then included into the bonds. But under the facilities, some of the really what you're going to see in there, there's nothing new. What you're going to see is some roof projects. We're going to be looking to work out at the animal control facility where they're leaking, a lot of leaks over there. Maybe some work on the transit bus barn roof. We also have some boiler replacement, primarily at APD headquarters. Again, many of these are Project 80s types of the facilities. So we also have some streetlight improvements, continuing to move to replacing our streetlights for LED. There's a compilation of work in there. Under the fire, and these are by departments, not necessarily how the bonds amount will be, as the Assembly works to, as the administration prepares a bond, the Assembly then approves a bond, the allocation of where the bonds will be may be adjusted slightly, but by department sort of responsibility. Under the fire department, they include the fire and ambulance. Ambulance is area-wide, it's an area-wide function, fire. So for those specifically to fire, we have a proposal in there to replace their radios, their handheld radios, their replacement schedule. We also have an apparatus replacement in that the fire department, as well as I mentioned earlier, the replacement of 2 ambulances inside their fleet. Right now, they're using reserve vehicles that provide daily service, and we want to replace those and so they can keep a solid reserve. Parks and Recreation, the bond amount is very much like last year. The projects are also very much like last year. Some of the highlights in there, we're going to replace the Coastal Trail Bridge at South Westchester Lagoon. We're going to rehab and repave and add signage to Campbell Creek Trail. We also have some improvements in Fairview Park, Thackeray Park, Midtown Square Park, and a variety of other safety improvements and little improvements around the municipality of Anchorage, improvements to playgrounds and the like. The police department, I put this project under the police department. What this project is $2.5 million to complement an effort that's going on statewide. When the state approved their capital budget, they put almost $5 million in there to improve an area-wide communication system all across the state where state, federal, and local agencies can talk to each other in the event of an emergency. And so the system is called WINOR. It's an area-wide service radio network. And in the event of a fire in the Mat-Su, our folks can use our radios and their radios, and we can communicate to each other. In the event of a flood or an ENI, we can talk to the troopers directly. We can talk to the Forest Service. So if our resources get allocated, this system will allow us to do that in the event of a local or a statewide emergency. And the state put some money in there locally in order for the system to work. We're proposing a bond of $2.25 million. I think, and this will be our contribution to the total system. We've done a similar thing in the past. I think it was in 2012, maybe or 13. We did a similar upgrade to or build to the network. It's a very important piece of equipment so that we can talk to other jurisdictions. On the roadway and the traffic side, the bond amount. So this would include all of the roadway recommendations from primarily in PM&E and traffic, and a little bit from street maintenance. But some of the big projects that you'll see in there that we don't have any big projects like Spenard or Turning In or things like that, but we do have some significant roadway improvements. There's 82nd Avenue, which is west of the old Seward Highway. Some drainage and road improvements. We have some capital funds for Campbell Woods subdivision, for Pleasant Valley subdivision. Both of those are phase 1 improvements. So we have some, those are capital improvements that follow on the design that we had in our last year bond. We also have some dollars in there to address how we deal with our stormwater and our storm drain system. There's a variety of others, alley paving, a lot of other little projects, flooding, glaciation type of programs in there. In your CIB, when you see that, there'll be a detailed list of every single project that you might be interested in and their location. And then the transit portion of our bond is about $900,000. That's primarily for matching our federal program. And so it's bus stop improvements, facility improvements inside the transit business. So the last few slides, what I'd like to do is summarize how our operating budget affects our budget, our position count, and our property taxes. So at 2000, when we approved the 2017 first quarter budget, we had about a $509 million budget. This proposed budget's $519 million. This budget has a proposal to basically increase the position count for public safety and also recommend a reduction in the non-public safety amount. But we also, the net effect is a reduction in total personnel of about 13 in the proposed budget. So if we take our 2017 property tax collections at 1Q, it was $285 million. We transfer that to 2018, it it would be $288.1 million, not quite a $3 million increase. So that's what would happen if we just went straight across and followed a similar process that we've done in the last two previous administrations have done. However, the administration would like to, is proposing a couple things that we've heard from some assembly members, also as a recommendation from the Budget Advisory Commission, that we consider applying a 10-cent gas tax.
Lance, not to interrupt you, but it's being introduced on the 24th of October.
24th of October. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Please continue, sir.
So what that would do, as also recommended by the Budget Advisory Commission and the Assembly to do something different, a 10-cent gas tax, excise tax, inside the cap, the tax cap, the gas tax would generate an estimated $11.7 million. So if we took 2017's approved budget, just applied the property taxes to a $350,000 house, property taxes would go up $30. However, if we apply a gas tax, the amount of property taxes we collect would be $276 because it would be inside the cap. The more gas taxes we collect, the less property taxes we collect. That would, in itself, save the average homeowner at $350,000 about $90 on their property taxes for 2018. The administration is also proposing that we up the residential property tax exemption from $20,000 to $50,000. It does not require a state law change. That would be the maximum amount in the state law. That would reduce property taxes for a residential property at $350,000, a reduction of $270,000. The net would be a reduction in property taxes of about $360 versus what we were collecting in property taxes in 2017. In rough figures, that's probably at least a 5% reduction in property taxes between 17 and 18. So it's a significant move, and that's what would get us to that number right there. So very briefly on the utility enterprises, let me just summarize by basically saying when you look at the utility summer budgets in 17 and 18, there's very little change. There's almost identical position count, capital budget, what they're spending it on. Pretty much it's all the only thing. The one thing that you will see when we do a presentation on the 27th is that the Anchorage wastewater utility is proposing a slight rate increase on the water side and the wastewater side, and we can talk a little bit more about that. But utilities are doing a great job helping manage their departments and supporting the government as much as they possibly can. So the last couple slides, Mr. Chairman, I just want to highlight the takeaways that I want to stress in this proposed budget. The administration is really continuing to do everything we can to enhance, promote, and build public safety. We're doing it in a variety of different ways, not only with police and fire. The snow removal increase, I talked about that. Again, we're going to be working and having conversations with the state of Alaska on how we allocate those resources. We do have a good relationship and recognize with the M&O folks, we recognize the difficult situation they're in. And when people call, residents call about snow removal, they're calling the mayor's office, and they don't know that C Street is not our situation. So we're trying to figure out a creative way in which we can address those issues. And it will help pedestrians, it will help our transit network, it will help on our school routes, our waste removal, so it will be a benefit. We also, if we have the ability to do it, we had some, given the weather, some cul-de-sac snow removal, so we'll be able to dip into that a little bit. One of the things I didn't mention in the high priority slides in the beginning, you'll see in this proposed budget about $200,000 as a one-time hit of money that we would then put in development services to start addressing some of these deteriorated properties, these cleanup properties. We've heard a lot of conversations about, the municipality has two sort of issues we have to address: our ability, our legal authority to actually get in and help homeowners clean up their properties and the resources to actually do that. this is bringing those resources to bear so that when we find the most egregious, high priority projects, whatever those would be, those that have a public safety health issue, we'll be working with development services to set those up. Housing and homelessness support, again, we're going to be leveraging other resources, and we'll be doing for that. Our infrastructure investment, the administration has recognized it's important to maintain what we have, but also grow the network and the industry as much as we possibly can. There's a lot of new start work in there, and a fair amount of construction work. The head count, just as simply as I can say it, the public safety numbers are up, and the non-public safety numbers are down a little bit in both directions. The Anchorage Police and Fire Retirement System contribution change, we're going to talk a little bit about that. I know that the administration wants to share that information with you, and I expect the Assembly will be interested in that, but that's all, that process will help us get to a zero-based budget, a balanced budget. And then I want to point out that in this proposed budget, we are not using any fund balance. Last year, we had about $10 million in there. This budget is using none. So that is a success at this point right here, because the way the departments helped us do this, and working again with the labor unions over 2017 and 2018, and some of the changes that we've had to make, this is a good thing. I just want to recognize that while it's unfortunate right now, and we'll continue to work, we'll be receiving a dividend from A1 MLP. This budget does not include a dividend from either one of those utilities. And then overall, the last point I want to make is we're going to be doing all of that and then provide property tax relief. So I think we have a very good story here. We've addressed a lot of issues. We've heard a lot of concerns from 17. We've modified our approach, and we've built a budget to address those as best as we possibly can with the means that we have. I just want to remind the Assembly, Mr. Chairman, talk about some of these things. We will be delivering all three budgets to the clerk on Monday. There is a work here, the budget will then be introduced on the 10th. We have a work session scheduled. We're going to focus on the general government. Our plan is literally to do all of general government in 4 hours. Last year, we had 2 blocks of about 3.5 hours apiece. The changes that we were proposing from 16 to 17, we didn't make a lot of changes. Here, we have basically the same magnitude while they're different. So I'm going to recommend that we do that. If for some reason we don't get through them all, and the Assembly wants to have an additional work session, we have that opportunity. But Mr. Chairman, based on the pace last year, we actually had to speed up and call people in to get process. So that's the schedule that we have. First public hearing on the 24th, your work session on utilities, enterprises, and that will also be on Andrew Halcrow's outfit, ACDA. Second public hearing November, and then just as a conversation and a placeholder, and speaking with Barbara and Rose, based on that, a week later, whatever amendments the Assembly might want to have, you could work those through your office. And if you want to have a work session on your proposed amendments, that would be your work session on that day. And then yes, the administration will look through those, prepare an S version, and then we'll look forward to the Assembly's approval on the 3rd Tuesday in October. In November. So,
Thank you, Lance. We've got a few questions for you. Just for the body, make sure you note the date of the 14th of November to have us send me amendments into the clerk. And the clerk's got the format correct. So if you don't have it, please get it from the clerk so we know which amendments are and they have the same format. But that's an important date. Mr. Dyson, sir, you're first.
Yeah, so this is my first cycle through this process in quite a while. So
You did years ago you went through this, sir.
For us old people, every day is new. So
Good point.
caution me on how, I don't want to get too deep down in the weeds here at this time, and so on. So, did I understand that you're counting on total around 7.2 million in revenue sharing?
Correct.
Okay. All right, that's,
It's been ground checked.
pardon?
It's been ground checked.
All right, and I'll be very interested in what you're doing here on the employer contribution on the retirement. I hope you satisfy me. I worry that we're kicking the ball, the can down that thing, and although we gotta save money everywhere we can, there's some sweet spots there from a, what's the word, actuarial perspective that I'll worry about. And did I understand that you're wanting an increase of 500,000 on the homeless?
Right.
That's what it is. And I'll want to know what we're spending now. My own very cursory thing is that if the total we're spending on the homeless may be somewhere between 25 and 50 million a year. That's federal, state, and local, and charitable, and so on and so forth, which doesn't include the impact on property values and property taxes, which I don't know how to deal with, but so I would really I'll be very interested on the total we're spending on the homeless and the subset, which is what the city spends on that. That's only three things I want to talk about right now.
We will get it.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
Let the minutes reflect, Ms. Dombrowski joined us about 30 minutes ago. Mr. Dunbar?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just brief comments, and I've got a couple of really quick questions. So first, I just want to say I really appreciate the focus of this budget on public safety and snow removal. I think it's got a lot of the right priorities. Real quick questions. On page 3, you've got the healthcare increase. When does the Vera Health investment kick in? Is that taking that into account, or is that a couple more years down the road?
So I can start on that. The Vera Health clinics will be open for municipal employees, in the first couple of months of 2018. The exact date. is not set.
So are projected savings built into this number then?
Both the costs and the potential savings are built in. We've been pretty conservative
Okay.
on anticipated savings. I believe our budget anticipates that we will simply recover the cost of the program in year 1. And we hope for better, but that's where we have sort of priced the healthcare plan for 2018.
Great. Well, I'm glad that we're able to get that off the ground so quickly. On page 4, is this okay, Mr. Chairman? I have a couple of different questions.
Go ahead, sir.
Okay. On page 4, did I hear you right that we're only planning an attrition academy for 2018 for police?
Right.
That's right? Yeah. So, all right, good. Next question. On the next page, are we, so the $4 million reduction to departments, are we planning any, maybe this is for Mayor or Mr. Abbott, are we proposing any of the same sort of, 0.5% or 0.25% across the board reduction from all the departments? Or does that just reflect a couple of departments losing employees or having a tons of reduction?
I believe it's approximately 20 of the 30 departments that are taking reductions, and no, it is not an across-the-board cut. Those are targeted at specific functions and services.
Okay, great. And so my last question, and this is a broader policy question, on page 9, when we're talking about increasing the residential tax exemption, it's something that Mr. Croft and I have been speaking about a lot. So you have a projection there of what it looks like for a $350,000 home. Now, I would like to know the property tax implications for a apartment building.
Okay.
So,
Sure. It'd be helpful if you'll show us, we can actually use specifics, specific buildings and properties because of that. So if you'll share with us a couple of examples of individual facilities, we can show you what those impacts would be on that.
So I can do that, but I'd also like, and I know all apartment buildings are different, right? They're widely variable, but we can find some kind of approximate median or something that looks like a quote-unquote typical apartment building. I'd be curious to figure that number out too.
Okay, I mean, there's certainly a commercial property rate that will hit, you know, on a per 100,000 of appraised value
On this item, John.
basis. But, yeah, and then we can do it at that level, and then we can also do it at individual properties.
Okay, thank you. Thank
On
you,
this
Mr.
item, John?
What is it, would an apartment building get the residential tax exemption?
That's his point.
If an owner I think that like for fourplexes maybe or smaller, there's a way that if the owner lives in a part of it, they get a fraction of the benefit, but they don't otherwise. Otherwise, it's treated as commercial property.
Anything else, Mr. Dunbar?
No, thank you,
Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Eric, you're next.
Yeah, I'll start with that. Great idea. The
It was yours.
wasn't mine. That was fun. Good lead up. It also has, and it took me way too long to figure it out, but it's both how high you can go and what percentage you do, right? So it's at 10% and 20,000. And so after Rose explained it to me 3 times, I got it. But so whether we change that 10% to 15 or 20 affects whether that 350 really gets the full thing, or whether if it's just 10%, then they're only getting a portion of it. Only the, if you will, $500,000 house gets the full $50,000 exemption. So I'd just like to know what, whether we're changing that percentage, and we can talk offline on that. On page, so I had a couple of questions, Mr. Chairman. I guess on page 6, the reduction on Anchorage Police and Fire, is that a diminishing pool that is, or there's still firemen in it, or is it they're all older firemen and police? Yeah.
Mr. Abbott?
Mr. Chairman, and we're introducing on the 10th the measure that will give the Assembly the chance to act on this recommendation, and we're hoping that the Assembly will schedule a work session next week to give primarily Mr. Falsey a chance to explain both the current situation
Right.
and begin to explain our recommendation. But the short answer is that up until the mid-90s, firefighters and policemen were not in PERS. They were in a separate retirement
In
system.
their own retirement system.
That was local for Anchorage, called the Anchorage Police and Fire Retirement System.
Good name.
Since that time, all new employees to those departments have been in PERS. There are currently 15 or 16
was the last published numbers of maybe 15 or 16 now.
current employees that are still members, active members of that older retirement system. The rest of the employees have retired from that system. There are a few that have rehired, that retired from the police and fire retirement system and then rehired in PERS. But even that's a relatively small number now. Those folks are aging out of the process. But yes, there are around 740 beneficiaries still in the Anchorage Police and Fire Retirement System.
740 recipients for 17 contributors as that comes out.
Yeah, the active members are making they're making their required contributions to the plan. It is a very small contribution. The system is currently expending about $30 million a year in benefits. I think it's gaining about $30,000 a year. I don't know, it might be a little more than that in contributions from members. The system is closed and is almost double closed in that there are no active members
Right.
anymore. But the situation is the system is only about 80% funded because of for a variety of reasons, which we'll talk more about hopefully next week. To address that 20% underfunding, for one of the code requires, the current municipal code requires us to make $10 million contributions to the system. We believe we can address that $20 million shortfall 20% shortfall, which is about a $70 million dollar-wise shortfall. We can do that less expensively than $10 million a year contributions.
Gotcha.
And that's what we will bring forward to you as a proposal. And that's being introduced on October 10th and set for public hearing sometime, late October, early November. And it is an assumption that, one of the assumptions upon which this budget is based.
Real quickly then, I know other
Go ahead,
people in line. Ambulance, you haven't put that out yet, and have you made a decision on whether it's O&M and how it looks different than any other proposal we've done?
We have made a decision. Our recommendation is that the staffing for what we currently call Medic 81 and Medic 82 be authorized in this budget inside the existing tax cap.
Okay.
Last spring, we recommended, the Assembly agreed, but the voters did not support a ballot proposition that would have grown the tax cap for the expense of the staffing of that ambulance. That's certainly an option that's available in 2018. Our recommendation, as described in this budget, is to do that inside the cap. And we believe we've shown you a process that will get us there. But that is a policy choice that certainly, can be discussed further.
Moving along in a presentation on solid waste services, you and I had discussion of whether we were over-saving for cleaning it up when we'd likely let it produce methane gas and either it not cost or have a positive thing. Are you guys going to, at some point when you're done with this, come up with a recommendation of whether that fund is needed, and if not, and if some fund is needed, what that value is?
That, yes, we do plan to revisit the care and closure expense for the solid waste in light of the anticipated productivity of the gas and the longer lifespan of the landfill. That is not built into these budget assumptions.
That's fine. You're going to do more on cul-de-sacs? I don't need to know the details, but that was a lot of complaints this time, and so you're doing something to spotlight that? That's great.
We're proposing to add money to the street maintenance organization for essentially one of two purposes. And a lot of it will depend on how much snow there is. So,
Sure.
we're currently in a little bit of a kerfuffle with the state over access to a snow dump. If we are able to get access to that snow dump, then these funds would be able to be used to enhance snow recovery services, both on muni cleanup and on state routes. The state is further reducing their snow removal effort on state routes. That is going to be particularly impactful on pedestrian facilities on state routes. We would recommend that we would be able to use this money to help the state on their PED facilities.
Backfill for them, in effect.
You betcha. And
the return is you're going to let us use the snow dump for free or cheap?
no, it probably won't be that simple, but
Sounds simple, sounds fun.
Yeah.
We haven't done that.
Mayor, what do you think about that? Never mind. Don't, let's not get that started. So alternatively, if we do not have access to the snow dump, and this is the West Anchorage or airport snow dump, then our own hauling expenses will be higher than they need to be. And a portion, maybe all of this $500,000 will be used to offset those expenses. So one way or the other, we're going to dedicate it to snow removal. Hopefully, we'll get access to the state snow dump, and then we will be able to use this money to enhance Anchorage's snow removal efforts. But that is dependent on the outcome of a state process.
I had some more, but I'll let you move
I
on.
think I got 5 more, and we got about 10 minutes.
All right.
Chris?
No, I'll be brief. Two things. One, you discussed alley paving, and I've had discussions with folks in the planning department, project management, and even the planning and zoning commission, and nobody seems to be able to identify the policy on which route selections are made. And so it would be great if the administration through this process could come up with a statement of policy on how alleys are prioritized so that people can start getting a sense of when they might be in the queue.
We'll be able to tell you in the next 30 days what our alley paving plan will be for 2018. It'll be dependent on the success of the road bond.
Of course.
But if the bond passes, we'll be able to tell you which alleys we expect to pave in 2018.
And hopefully some rationale as to how the decision is made.
Oh, no, we can't tell you that.
And then last, just follow up with what Mr. Dyson said. One of the costs that APD sinks into homelessness, or Anchorage sinks into homelessness, is APD and AFD, and the sleep off and all of the white vans. And so it'd be great just as complimenting what his request is, to see those costs built in, because we are spending those dollars being responsive all the time.
Without a doubt.
Thank you.
The safety patrol and the safety center would definitely be included.
And APD and AFD response. Thank you.
Mr. France?
My question is.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Pete?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple quick questions here. One of the biggest complaints I heard from members of East Anchorage during last winter was that the bus stops did not get cleared. And so people were standing on the side of the street waiting for a bus. And many times, especially if someone was in a wheelchair or whatever, it was nigh on to impossible for them to wait for a bus or to even get on a bus because of all the snow. And so I'm hoping that we're going to concentrate some of our increased budget on some of the bus
I
stops.
made some, my initial comments were those priorities, and one of them was transit, because we're going to be modifying our transit routes as well, and we want to make sure that people can get there.
Right.
Yes, and our transit routes are more reliant than ever on state roads, and so that will have to happen.
Right.
Is that all, Pete?
One more, and I just wondering, if we're going to increase the ambulance fee by $100, what does that bring the new total up for an ambulance if you call?
I'll be guessing about the.
Anybody know that?
No.
Okay.
But-
Thank
But
you.
it is, but what we're doing
Thank
is
you.
consistent with what's being done around the state. We're-
John, you're next.
A couple of, I think we
Got
funded
6
a
minutes.
study of, that was supposed to pick a department and do zero-based budgeting. Did that happen, and which one, and results?
No, we haven't.
I think what happened this year is with the process of the SAP project, the OMB staff was consumed by that, and we had to unfortunately prioritize.
Okay. 200,000 for deteriorated properties. Wouldn't we, I mean, if we clean up a property, how do we get money out of the property owner?
So, I can start, and I can jump in.
Go ahead, sir.
Talking to development services, we asked, before we put the dollars in there, how would that, how much money should it be, and would there be a method in which we could get reimbursed? And so the initial estimate was about $200,000. I think they could really make an impact. They do have a method, or we would have a method in which we would be able to recoup some of those costs, and we can talk about that with development services. We do that presentation, but I think Jack Frost and that group is, they're excited about this opportunity, but they also recognize it's not free.
Okay, good, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, John. Fred?
Yeah. I think Tuesday I talked with the city manager about 3 ideas I have for budget reductions. A presentation on revenue sharing that we could go together with and convince the state that we deserve it, because we end up being the end point for a whole part of Alaska's social problems. And I think the state should understand that we need their help to deal with the statewide program. And then even perhaps a lawsuit to get monies from the criminal fund that would help us support the kind of treatment we need to be here. My last analysis was that there were $8 or $9 million a year that should be being used for treatment that the state shouldn't get to us. Anyways, and I asked Mr. Mayor for an appointment with you to talk about my ideas on Tuesday, and I haven't heard back. Now, I raise a lot of teenagers, and I'm used to being ignored, but if you guys don't want to talk to me or about those ideas, fine, just give me some notice.
Fred, I'm always anxious to talk to you. You know,
I haven't noticed that.
It's been 20 years I've been talking to you.
Yeah, but if I have to do these things completely on my own without you guys working with me, it'll be clumsy and not as good as it could be if we can work together, even if we disagree. Thank you.
Tim?
All kinds of things, but I'm gonna be conservative in terms of what I'm talking about. In terms of dividends with regards to utilities, and you did not include any, does that mean we're not gonna get any?
To clarify that, so we do receive a dividend from the port.
Okay.
We do receive a
Yeah.
dividend from solid waste, and we're going to receive an increased dividend from solid waste. we're not receiving
From the
anything
other
from
two.
AWU or MLMP, and we're not proposing that they're not included in this proposed budget. However, that doesn't mean that we're not actively working with the RCA to figure out a way in which we can, in 2018, hopefully receive a dividend. But right now, in the process, we're being conservative, and it's not in this budget.
In terms of investment in infrastructure around the city, we did a good job this year, and I want to applaud the administration in terms of the road projects that we had specifically to keep people working. As the state cuts back, it's up to us to keep our community healthy, and that means we've got to have work for folks. And I know out in the valley, I guess, in particular, we'll have some projects. There'll be work projects. So I kind of applaud your no major road projects, I guess, to speak of in there, even though I would like to advocate for the continuation of the Spinard Road project, the next section. But that's, it only took 20 years to get the ones we got. So anyway, thank you.
I got no one else on the line to speak. Just some couple comments from me. We've got SAP training from 12 to 12:30. Rose, which floor are we going to? 5 or?
We're just one floor down in room 700 downstairs.
From 700, please go. And then we've got the senior center from 1 o'clock to 2:30. So please attend that. It's all the work sessions we have today. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm really proud of you guys that safety is now going to be number one from now on. Thank you. Especially with, since snow in October, we've got little kids that are maybe going to want to trick or treat. But I'm a little bit angry that all these years I've lived in Anchorage, there are still entire streets with no street light. And I've traveled all over the United States. I've never seen a city that has entire streets with no street light. And I'm not referring to the one that I've been bugging Pete and the mayor about. I'm referring to, like, when you're in Muldoon, let's say behind St. Patrick's Church when you're going down, there are, and I thought my little friend Marilyn was exaggerating. She says, Lisa, there has never been street lights behind St. Patrick's.
They weren't designed with them, ma'am. Unfortunately, I wish they had. We've got to end this meeting. We've got to be downstairs. Next floor down. This work session's over with. Thanks for being here.